In this video, we will show you how to replace your rear axle. On this Ford Flex, you'll have one of these located on each side of the vehicle behind your rear wheels. Let's get into it. The first thing you're going to want to do is safely raise and support the rear of your vehicle so the wheel is off the ground. Once you've done that, continue on to removing all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts and then the wheel. Now we can continue on to removing the 32mm axle nut holding the axle to the wheel bearing. Use a hammer and punch to break this free. Once you have movement between the axle and the wheel bearing, you can continue. Let's continue on to removing the caliper from the area. For this, you're going to find that you have 2 15mm headed bolts holding the caliper bracket in place to the knuckle. Remove the pair. We'll start by loosening the top one, leaving in just a couple threads, and then fully remove the lower one. That's what that one looks like. Let's put that back in, just a couple threads here. Once you have both of those out of there, you can remove the caliper. With it off of the vehicle, it's a good idea to take a look at those brake pads. Make sure it doesn't look like they're broken or damaged in any way. Now let's move along to removing the upper mounting nut that holds the sway bar link to the knuckle. To do that, we'll be using a 17 ratchet wrench on the nut and a 7mm to hold the stud. Remove the sway bar link from the knuckle. Just go ahead and give that a little wiggle. Sometimes it requires a couple taps. Now let's move along the front area of the knuckle. We're going to remove the toe link nut. After you've done that, you can remove the toe link from the steering knuckle. 18mm. To get this out of here a little easier, you might find that you're going to have to try to tug on the steering knuckle. You can either do this by hand or gently pry on it with a bar. Now that we have the toe link separated, continue on to your ABS wire. You're going to find that this is mounted in several areas. We're going to dislodge it, but leave it attached to the knuckle. Now let's follow that ABS wire up along the top of the subframe. To remove this, you can use a small pry bar or even a trim tool. We'll just get underneath the clip and slide it out of the subframe. Careful not to break the clip because we will be reusing it. we are. Now we can follow that ABS wire to where it comes on the inside of the subframe, close to the fuel tank. We'll just carefully pry this out of place as well. Continue following the ABS wire to its mounting clip. Now to get to this connector, you're going to find that you have a locking tab. Let's press right in on that. You can use a small flat blade screwdriver for that, and just give that ABS wire a quick tug to remove it from its connecting point. Now we can take hold of that ABS wire and carefully remove it. The next thing you'll want to do is apply some pressure underneath the lower control arm. Once you've done that, we're going to continue on to where the upper control arm meets the top of the knuckle. For this, you're going to find that you have a 21mm headed bolt that comes through from the rear towards the front, and there's a 24mm mounting nut to be removed. Let's hold that bolt head with a 21mm and remove the nut. Now we can remove that mounting bolt as well. The next thing we'll want to do is use a pry bar, come in between the control arm and the knuckle, and gently start to separate this. The next thing we'll do is remove the lower part of the shock from the knuckle. For this, you're going to find that you have a 21mm headed bolt that comes through from the rear towards the front, and a 21mm nut on the front side. Let's go ahead and remove the nut and the mounting bolt. Now we can move along to the mounting bolt that holds the steering knuckle to the lower control arm. For this 21mm headed bolt, we're only going to be loosening it. You don't have to fully remove it. Something else that I'll mention is on the forward side, there is a nut that has a little arm, which makes it a captured nut, so you don't necessarily have to worry about holding that one. Now that I've got some space here, we can continue on by pivoting that knuckle out along the top. Now at this point, we're going to have to complete a couple steps at the same time. Continue with your hammer and punch. We're going to start breaking the axle free from the wheel bearing once again. As we do so, we're pulling the top end of this down. We're pulling it towards us. While we do that, we're also going to be separating the axle from the backside of the wheel bearing and pulling it out through this way. Now the next thing we'll do is use a pry bar along the back side of the knuckle, and we're going to carefully apply some pressure, pulling this down and away. Take hold of that axle and pull it out of the back side of the wheel bearing. Be extremely careful for any pinch points. There we are. Now we can follow that axle to where it connects on to the rear differential. To break this free, you can use a small pry bar and gently get in this area and pry it to separate it. If that doesn't work, you might want to just go ahead and give this a couple taps to drive it out of the differential. Just be careful that it does not fall down on you. Now let's continue pulling that out of place. And there it is, friends. Now with the axle out of the differential, It's important to make sure that you clean and inspect the seal. If it looks like it's torn, worn, or damaged in any way, now's a perfect time to replace it. Now once you've cleaned that seal, we're ready for the installation. Let's take this and carefully put it in place, making sure that we don't get any dirt or debris on the shaft that's going into the differential. Slide that right in. Now we'll just tap this in using a rubber mallet. Once you feel as though it's fully installed into the differential, it's important to make sure that you take hold of it and try to pull it out and away. We need to make sure that it's completely locked into the differential itself. That's tight. Now we can start putting the far end of the axle into the backside of the wheel bearing. While doing this, you're going to have to start pulling on that knuckle, pulling it away from the vehicle, so we can get that axle shaft into the wheel bearing. We'll continue with our pry bar and gently pry this a little bit. Now we can swing this down and into position. Let's get that shaft lined up with the hole. At this point, you can release pressure from that and start pushing it through the wheel bearing. With that in place, let's continue on to reinstalling our toe link. We're going to tug on this. We'll get that stud into place. Slide that down and in there. Now we can move to where the upper control arm connects to the knuckle. For this, you're going to have to push in along the top. We're also going to need to start pulling down on the control arm to get the bushing lined up with the mounting holes. Once you have it in place, continue on with your large bolt. You can use a ratchet strap to tug on this knuckle, pulling it inward. If you used a ratchet strap, go ahead and remove that now. Now that we have that bolt in there, let's make our way back down to that toe link. Start the nut on, snug it up, and torque it to 59 foot-pounds. Now we can reinstall the 24mm nut onto the 21mm headed bolt. Snug this up and torque that to 148 foot-pounds. Next, we're going to move along to where the shock connects onto the knuckle. You can either raise or lower that control arm to align it. We'll continue on with our mounting bolt, sliding it through from the rear towards the front. Let's get that mounting nut on there. Now we can snug this up and then torque it to 129 foot-pounds. Move along to your sway bar link. We're going to slide that through the knuckle, start on the mounting nut. Sometimes you'll either have to raise or lower the lower control arm to get this in place. Now we'll snug this up and torque it to 41 foot-pounds. Now we can remove the jack from underneath the lower control arm. Now it's time to install our caliper. Now once you have that slid into place, continue on with your 2 mounting bolts, snug them up, and then torque each of them to 46 foot-pounds. Now let's continue on to our lower mounting bolt. Snug this up and torque it to 196 foot-pounds. Now we can move along to our ABS wire. We'll start resecuring this. Make our way underneath the control arm here. We'll press that into position as well. Now we can take the rest of that wire and bring it up along the subframe. And we'll resecure that plastic clip as well. Let's get this pressed into the frame. And now we can make our way underneath. Now in here we can go ahead and press that into the subframe as well. Now we can reconnect in that connector. When you press it in, you want to listen for a click, give it a tug to make sure it's completely secured. The next thing you'll want to do is have your vehicle a little closer to the ground. We're going to continue with a long pry bar, come in between your lug studs, and go ahead and turn this clockwise. Continue on to the axle nut. We'll snug this up by hand. Once you feel as though you have it bottomed out, torque it to 258 foot-pounds. At this point, you're going to want to double check your work. Make sure you tightened and torqued everything. After that, continue on to applying the wheel, starting on all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts. We'll get the wheel back on the ground and torque them. Now, with the wheel safely on the ground, we can torque these to 100 foot-pounds in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Okay friends, we showed you how to install your rear axle on your vehicle. At this point, hop in the passenger compartment, pump up the brake pedal till it's nice and firm. Take your vehicle for a road test, make sure you don't hear any funny noises, and no ABS light. Aside from that, get yourself safely down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.